XCOM 3 has been in our hearts and minds for nearly a decade now. Even though it feels like a no-brainer business decision for Firaxis to just give us this game, I would like to set the hype aside for this video and talk about some of the challenges and hurdles that XCOM 3 would face. Issues that might explain why we haven't seen it just yet, or worse, why it might be set up for failure if it ever does come out. As always, feel free to weigh in with your thoughts in the comments section. Starting off with something that is not the highest priority to a lot of players, but in my opinion still has a direct effect on how XCOM 3 would play and what the loop for it would be. The lore and story continuation of the XCOM franchise is kind of in a weird place right now. We all remember that infamous cutscene from the end of War of the Chosen where they were teasing something coming out of the water and saying that the real war is just beginning, only for that to be glossed over and never talked about again. Chimera Squad takes place only 5 years after that has all happened, and there is absolutely no mention or lore of a water threat or aliens in that game. Now obviously you could say that that game has nothing to do with the ocean or the water and it's all about City 31, so there would be no reason to dive into that. However, it's pretty much established that Advent has been defeated, the aliens and the humans have signed peace treaties and are now integrating their races. If there was some type of alien threat underwater attacking the land, I don't think that the integration would be the top priority or that it would even be happening. To further complicate this entire situation, there's XCOM Legends, and if you don't know what that is, I don't blame you. It's a mobile game that I'm not sure really anybody played. However, it does insert itself in the lore between XCOM 2 and Chimera Squad and even has direct ties to Chimera Squad, referencing characters from that game and having the newly developed City 31 as a crucial point in the storyline, which you could argue may make it canon. The rest of the story is a bit of a jumbled mess that contradicts a lot of the previous lore, but between that and the anticlimactic ending of Chimera Squad, where can we go from here? I mean, think about it. Earth has already defeated the alien threat, we've absorbed all of their alien technology, and we even have super soldiers that are psionically gifted. There's really no good way to explain busting XCOM back down to basic tech and weapons and a meager resistance force for that gameplay loop that the series is known for. The only exception that I can think of here is continuing with that terror from the deep type of game that was teased, where everything is underwater, so it requires different types of weapons and technology. That type of setting does come with its own limitations and issues though, including something I'll talk about in the next section. In my opinion, the only way that the main story or lore can continue is for the game to step into a larger scale. Maybe something like finding and fighting against that bigger threat the elders allude to and seem to be running from, or even including the underwater threat in this. The issue is that a large scale or interplanetary war means a bigger strategy layer and possibly some 4X style management, which I'll admit I'm not a big fan of, and it could leave the core XCOM squad battle style out in the cold. I do think if it was done right though, with a large-scale management system that wasn't quite the slog that 4X games tend to be, and still focused on the battle-to-battle squad combat, it could be amazing. That is asking for a lot though. I mean, the developers could always just retcon the lore at any point and set us up in another invasion scenario, but that just feels very lazy. Or we could just get a full-on reboot and fresh start to the series yet again, which honestly would not surprise me. I've actually seen a decent amount of players in favor of that, so let me know down in the comments which route you think XCOM 3 should take. Personally, while I'm not against a reboot, my biggest issue is what would it offer to separate itself from what's already established and what we already have available? Bringing us to the next problem. XCOM 2's mod community and versatility is just too good. The mod community has done amazing work over the years and is still fully alive and kicking. If you've only ever experienced XCOM on console, you're missing out on a huge chunk of the experience and what it can really offer. Everything is here. New enemy types, better AI, new infiltration campaigns and mechanical overhauls, plus quality of life features and cosmetic customization that really can't be beat or even implemented by Firaxis. Looking at you, Master Chief. I'm not sure anybody expected the mods to go to the extent that they did for XCOM 2, and I wouldn't blame Firaxis if they were intimidated by the high bar set by this community. Not to mention War of the Chosen, which I know some players don't care for, but in my opinion is the perfect expansion and send-off to the game. XCOM 2 has really become a sandbox where players can mix and match all of these things together as much as they want. And let's be realistic, how could any game studio hope to compete with the amount of options, versatility, and customization that is available right now? XCOM 3 would not only need updated graphics and mechanics, but it would be directly competing with the modded XCOM 2 and all of its possibilities. If the game were to come out and be bare bones, severely lacking in quality of life, or just plain buggy and poorly made, Players would really have no reason to buy it or wait for it to be fixed when they could just go back to modding the previous game. And for a studio like Firaxis that is backed by a AAA publisher like 2K, that puts a lot of pressure on. Not to mention, the latest game, Chimera Squad, was much less modder friendly than XCOM 2, and we don't know if that was a choice deliberately made by 2K and Firaxis, or just a byproduct of the lack of resources and support that were put behind Chimera Squad. And to take it one step deeper, if they did decide to do a Terror from the Deep game and use that angle, I feel like at some point the novelty would wear off and it would begin to feel more gimmicky than anything else. And in my opinion, the limitations of that setting would make it so that modding could only do so much. On the other hand, if it were to be combined as part of a larger conflict and you still had land, air, and sea combat, that would be something I would love to see. However, none of that really matters if XCOM 3 were to launch with extremely limited or no mod support. It would basically be shooting itself in the foot from day one. XCOM 2's replayability really looms large here. Now I hear what you're saying. Why couldn't we just be happy to have a new XCOM game, buy it, and enjoy it for what it is? Stop comparing and overanalyzing, right? And I'll admit, that sounds great, and I would be very happy just to have a new XCOM game, along with a lot of other players. Things have changed a lot since XCOM 2 though. Firaxis and 2K are not quite what they used to be. Remember that XCOM 3 will almost certainly be a $70 game, and 2K has leaned hard into the DLC and Season Pass model. Just look at Civiization VI and Midnight Suns for examples. At some point, this really just becomes about the value proposition. Season passes, special editions, early access, and all of that will probably run it up to around $100, and if XCOM 3 is just a stripped down version of a game from 10 years ago that I have to wait another year for all of the DLC to release and turn it into a full game, I'll pass. Even worse, if we get a reimagining of XCOM and it gets turned into some sort of live service model, I would rather just not bother with it. Remember, Midnight Suns has an in-game currency only obtainable with real money that is 100% completely useless. It almost feels inevitable that there will be some sort of microtransaction or financial hook. Imagine an XCOM game that would allow you to buy items to increase hit chances or have extra actions. I'm only half joking here, but all of that really is just speculation. However, on the development side, the Firaxis staff has suffered layoffs and cutbacks and is likely going to be focusing a lot of their resources on Civiization VII and its inevitable DLCs. Jake Solomon, the creative director behind the modern XCOM reboots, very publicly left Firaxis and said he was done with turn-based strategy. Around that same time, a lot of other key staff members and developers that were part of a very passionate team that worked through tons of setbacks also left. The XCOM franchise, even the original games, all have a pretty troubled development history and don't seem to be easy games to make. Most of them have only seen the light of day because of a very passionate team that wanted to make it work. That being said, Sid Meier is still at Firaxis, and the game director from the Chimera Squad team is also there and seems to have a lot of passion for the series as well. Chimera Squad obviously showed that there was some experimentation and a new mindset regarding the franchise, and that could be good or bad. We don't really know what to expect. There are some things I do know though. Core features like character customization and creation have to come back to the franchise. For whatever reason, this seems to be an overlooked feature in these games, but being able to fully customize and lose your soldiers was a huge hook for a lot of people in XCOM 2. In addition, Chimera Squad had its fair share of bugs and issues at launch. XCOM is not the new kid on the block anymore, and a lot of turn-based tactics games since have tweaked or updated the XCOM 2 mechanics and shown some of the weaknesses of the original game design. XCOM's biggest edge is just how polished it is compared to a lot of these smaller studios and games in this same genre. If XCOM 3 is not polished and does nothing to change or update the core game design of XCOM 2, it really won't stand out in the genre anymore except for in name only. Basically, XCOM 3 has a lot of hills to climb, and Firaxis is a victim of their own success. Sometimes it's just better to go out on a high note. I mean, XCOM 2 has carried the torch for this long and is showing no signs of slowing down. For 3 reasons why it is still top tier almost 10 years later, click through to the video on screen now.